Madam Speaker, I think it's high time that we started not just using the word crisis when it comes about talking about our housing, but as Elvis said, we need a little less conversation, a little more action. We need to declare housing a crisis. We need to swing hammers and get homes built in this country. In my home riding of Bay of Quinte, housing is an existential crisis that needs action. The lack of homes has resulted in sky-high costs for both housing and rental units. Only a massive increase of supply will fix the situation. We need to double new builds of homes in Canada right now, utilizing the private sector with government-assisted affordable housing, utilizing existing housing inventory by the government, 15%, and we need full collaboration between all levels of government. In Canada, it is the top issue right now, a housing bubble that has absolutely been exacerbated by COVID-19, the amount of cheap cash that it entered this country's economy. So what does this housing crisis mean for Canadians? More poverty, a further out of reach unaffordable housing situation, and further out of reach ability for first-time home buyers to afford a home in this country. It has also resulted in increased homelessness. I have double the homelessness rate in the last 2 years than I had the 4 years prior. Mortgage payments now eat 45% of an average homeowner's income. That is already being eroded by massive inflation. And speaking of the inflationary tax, rental in Vancouver, Toronto, and Halifax is up over 16% when paychecks are down over 3% because of inflation. When we talk about a crisis, we talk about citizens who are having trouble deciding whether to pay for rent or groceries, mortgages or medication, or having to take several jobs in order to afford a down payment for a first-time home. Take the case of Erica from my riding. Erica and her family have lived in the same home for 6 years, the time of the Liberal government, and now are being forced to leave as their landlords sold their home and new owners want to renovate and flip the property for profit. She wrote to me that they are paying $1,000 a month plus all utilities, and now are being served an N11 and made to move January 31st. Both her husband and she work full-time but cannot find affordable housing. The cheapest housing they can find is $2,000 a month plus utilities. So what is the cause of this housing? It's supply. That is the problem. It's going to be building supply that is the solution, alongside some other key government programs, but supply is the key ingredient. Take the Golden Horseshoe of Ontario as an example. In 5 years, again, the Liberal government, 2016 to 2021, the region added 780,000 new residents, but only 270,000 new homes. How much supply do we need in Canada? Well, if we compare ourselves to other G7 nations, we are dead last in supply per capita. In fact, to meet the median of our friends in the G7, Italy, France, the UK, Germany, Japan, and the United States, we would need 1.8 million homes today, according to a study from Scotiabank on affordable housing. The government would like to say they are making a dent in supply. The Honourable Minister of Immigration stated in the House that the Liberal government has created in 6 years 100,000 units. So if I do the math, and believe me, I'm correct, that means just to meet the medium household supply in Canada, not including increased immigration we need and is coming as COVID ends, that it would take 108 years at the government building supply just to meet demand today. This, Madam Speaker, is why I'm using the word crisis to describe housing. What has been happening is not working in quelling our housing prices and housing and rental, creating more poverty, and it's creating unaffordability. In this country, Madam Speaker, we have the land. What we don't have is supply. And because of that, and the reason for that, is an ample amount of red tape, NIMBYism, and lack of coordination of programs to ensure we take this crisis as seriously as we can. And to be clear, the government has never taken concerns seriously enough. According to home builders associations, including home builders in my own Bay of Quinte, the government is just not engaging the stakeholders in the trenches. Home builders who are more than capable of building homes are under-respected and under-represented in all levels of government. Here is the reality. The process of taking a parcel of land from concept to reality has become far too complex, expensive, and slow. For a small subdivision, this is approaching 10 years. The financial risks and amounts are so significant it is becoming only available to large corporations, who have little to no interest in small regions of Canada. And if they do, it's too late, too little for our local response to meeting housing needs. The layers of various approval agencies and utility corporations without accountability are so great that even if we wanted to build the housing we need, it fits into the Liberal plan of decades into the future. We need all levels of government to treat this as an issue to solve, with the federal government leading the way. We need to utilize the creative entrepreneurial skills of Canadians to solve the problems. We have some great ideas that can be implemented from the Conservative Party right away. That included in our platform during this unneeded election, freeing up the private sector to work alongside the government to build 1 million homes in 3 years. This motion, which frees up 15% of real estate, or 37,000 federal real estate buildings for affordable housing, is absolutely incredible. It stops the time we need to start construction to end and actually utilizes supply that's there right now. Implementing a immediate freeze on foreign home builders for 2 years is absolutely essential, and we've heard support of that across the aisle. And yes, we've heard universal support for not taxing primary residences. The Conservative plan is an appropriate federal government response to the situation, but recognizing, and I'm suggesting, Madam Speaker, that we also make this a national crisis, that in this crisis there are broader solutions that will require collaboration by all parties across all levels of government. And there are solutions that the federal government can help take a leadership position in, including cutting red tape to increase building starts. This includes building housing units through city-urban core intensification. One example includes housing approvals being no more than 120 days. I mentioned earlier in this House, the average time to approve an apartment building to build in Toronto is 10 years. We need to make sure we're starting to build, and we build now. We need a staging and development policy in each municipality that always ensures there are shovel-ready lots in a 5-year slot, and if not fillable, they have the tools to insert more buildable lots. There should be no reason for every municipality to not have builds occurring every season and to meet the needs of supply in this crisis. We need to complete a housing needs assessment by the end of 2022, working with existing and developing newly recommended changes to provincial legislation and municipal official plans. Too often we are seeing development come to councils when the public unaware of where the housing is going and what kind of housing is needed to fix this crisis. What this results in is NIMBYism or banana people. The build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. Terrible. We need a 25-year outlook on housing needs with clear communication that all that live here to convert NIMBYism into YIMBYism. There are examples across this planet where governments are working with developers who are working with residents on creating more housing in their own backyards. They're saying yes. We need to work with the provinces, immigration, and our local education institutions to attract and train skilled tradespeople necessary to work in our housing industry and build new housing starts. We are missing a tremendous amount of skilled trades that pay incredible salaries in this country, and we need to make sure that we again start saying skilled trades are great, get into the trades. We need to increase necessary infrastructure that supports increased housing units in all sectors. This includes intensification developments, transit systems, water, sewer and treatment plants, green energy developments, building walkable cities and neighborhoods, and looking at a regional urban growth, to name a few. We need to build a mix of housing units that represent our regional and local needs and demands, and we need to build up in our downtowns in our rural areas. We need intensification. And something that has worked in Toronto and Vancouver for affordable housing is inclusionary zoning. But we need to ensure there are enough carrots versus sticks to ensure we have the right type of housing and incentives that will attract developers to invest in the area. Affordable housing that is 30% of income or 80% of market rent. Again, back to our Conservative motion. When we take existing inventory, we can do that. To my NDP friends, that is possible. That's a reason to vote for this motion. Madam Speaker, there are measures that fit into all levels of government, and the role I see the federal government having in a crisis is a leadership role at looking at emergency measures to build supply. The role I see Parliament taking is taking a leadership role in order to vote for good motions that produce housing and takes a little bit of a bite out of this crisis. For rental and stand-alone housing for our citizens, for newcomers to our country, with the second most land in the world, it should not be that we are in a housing crisis and the measures undertaken, the measures to try to beat COVID-19, had cash influxed into the economy instead of efforts focused on building supply. 100,000 units in 6 years is not enough, Madam Speaker. It is disgraceful. And for the money, the $29 billion touted as a success alongside more than $400 billion that has been the fuel to the fire in this housing crisis, we are in a situation that will not leave many of our Canadians untouched by this crisis.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, the member said this good motion. Even their coalition partners in the bloc, agree that this is not a good motion. They'll still vote for it, but it's not a good motion. And, Madam Speaker, we have, a government that is invested in social housing, historical amounts. The member across the way would not be able to tell me another government that has ever invested as much in national housing. My question to the member is, does he recognize any hypocrisy between the Conservatives now calling for the federal government to act on social housing when Stephen Harper did absolutely zip when it comes to social housing, and this is a government that has invested historical amounts?
Good question.
Honourable Member for Bay of Quinte.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm actually listening to the government that has the worst housing crisis this country's ever had. If we want to talk about government support, we're giving that support tonight. We're talking about actually fixing that and looking at solutions that, as we've said with trade and other failed promises this week, that it's a made in Canada solution where we're having all parties agree to go forward to fix this today. Madam Speaker, we need to swing hammers. We have to stop talking. Less conversation, more action.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the member for his speech. This year, the Parliamentary Budget Officer reported on how the federal government has spent less than half of the funding earmarked for their two main housing programs. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer talked about the limited impact of the Liberals' National Housing Strategy. More and more people in my community of Victoria are struggling to pay rent. They are unable to afford a home, and the pandemic has only made things worse. The Liberals are failing Canadians when it comes to housing and at the same time patting themselves on the back. And my colleague, the NDP critic for housing, obtained data showing how the Liberals are failing to help provinces like British Columbia, prioritizing provinces like Ontario. And I understand the member represents a riding on Ontario, but especially with BC facing a housing crisis, people facing the impacts of the climate emergency, making the housing crisis even more dire. Through you, Madam Speaker, can the member speak to the need for this government to prioritize housing across the country and make sure that BC is getting its fair share?
The Honourable Member for Bay of Quinte.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I couldn't agree more. We have to prioritize housing. And like I've said, we have to start prioritizing action on housing. And I think this motion, and it sounds like the member's agreeing with me, she should be agreeing with this motion. It gets units that are existing, standing in government coffers into the housing supply system. Like I said, we need 1.8 million homes. We should be making sure we take as much land as we can, as many buildings as we can, and convert them into housing, all kinds of housing for everyone who needs it. If we don't take action, we're going to be in a heck of a mess in a little bit of time. We're already in it. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the speech from my friend from Bay of Quinte. I listened to the Liberal question, and over again, all throughout this debate, all that was said on that side is how much money they are spending on this program. But yet, the problem is getting worse, and that's what we're trying to explain all day long, is that the problem is growing, but they just say, we're going to spend more. Then they say, we're going to fix it with yet another government program. Does my friend from Bay of Quinte recognize, I know he has, that the government just continues to fail and they can't figure out how to get out of this?
Our member for Bay of Quinte has 1 minute to respond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and absolutely. We have cash being handed out, and right now what we see from people are they can't make their mortgage payments. They can't pay for groceries. They're having trouble with the next month's rent. And it's because of more cash. And I'll tell you right now, the government solution, more cash. And what's going to happen in 3 months from now? I still can't afford my fabric because groceries have gone up another $200. Again, we need action. You know, the best part about this plan for housing, if we have housing now that we can get tradespeople in to create units, we create jobs. And what do jobs create? They create paychecks. And that's what fixes this problem.